My name is Corporal Alfred Downing, and I set that down first because a man telling a story like this one owes the listener some way of judging how much to trust his eyes. And mine, in the autumn of 1917, had a bullet graze above the left brow and a leg wound beneath it that kept me abed at Cliff Manor for the better part of 6 weeks. I had never once, in all that time, heard Private Rhys Bevan say a single word, which is why I remember so exactly the evening he finally did. Cliff Manor had been a gentleman's country house before the war took it, the way the war took every house of any size that year, and turned its long gallery into a convalescent ward for men whose bodies had mostly healed and whose minds had not caught up to the news. We slept in rows of iron beds beneath a ceiling still painted with cherubs some previous owner had commissioned in better times. Plump pink infants trailing ribbon among painted clouds, entirely indifferent to the row of narrow beds beneath them and the men who lay awake in those beds each night, listening to each other not sleep. By the autumn of 1917, there were 14 of us in that gallery, in various states of the particular silence the war had taught us all, each in his own way. Some talked too much, filling every hour with cricket scores and hometown gossip, because silence let the wrong thoughts in. Some, like me, talked just enough to be thought recovered and no more. And one of us did not talk at all. Rhys Bevan's way was the worst of it. He had come to us in July, a Welsh boy of 22 from a mining village whose name I never did learn to say properly, carried in on a stretcher with no visible wound at all, no missing limb, no bandaged eyes, nothing the doctors could point to and name, only a stillness that had settled over him somewhere on a ridge in Flanders, and had not lifted since. He ate what was put in front of him if someone guided the spoon. He slept, or seemed to. He did not speak, did not weep, did not, so far as any of us could tell, register that a war or a hospital or 14 other broken men existed around him at all. The doctors called it shell shock and prescribed rest, which is a kind treatment and largely useless, and after 4 months of rest, Rhys Bevan was exactly as silent as the day he arrived. I had watched orderlies wave a hand before his open eyes, and watched those eyes not so much as flicker in response, and I had, God forgive me, come near to thinking of him the way some of the newer nurses did, as furniture that needed turning and feeding, rather than a man who might, someday, need anything else. Nurse Beatrice Sallow came to us that September, a volunteer of 23, who had left a comfortable house in Surrey and a finishing school education to empty bedpans and change dressings for men she had never met, which is a more ordinary kind of heroism than the papers ever wrote about, but no smaller for it. She was not, by her own cheerful admission, the most naturally gifted nurse in the ward. Sister Ellery, who ran the place with the particular iron patience of a woman who had buried a husband and 2 brothers to this war already, corrected her dressing technique at least twice a week, and I twice saw Nurse Sallow reduced nearly to tears over a poorly rolled bandage. But she had a gift the rest of us noticed within her first fortnight, which was that she never once spoke to Rhys Bevan the way the rest of the staff did, in the careful, over-bright tone people use for the very old, or the very ill, or the very far away. She spoke to him as though he could hear every word, and might, at any moment, choose to answer. She told him the day's small news, the weather, what was in the soup, a joke one of the other men had made, the way she might have spoken to any of us, and when he did not answer, as he never once did, she did not seem discouraged, so much as simply patient, the way a person is patient with a locked door they still believe, for reasons of their own, will eventually open. There was an old upright piano in the day room at the gallery's far end, badly out of tune, and missing 2 keys in the upper register, left behind by whichever family had owned the house before the requisition, and never once mentioned since, as though its former owners had walked away from it, the way one walks away from a life that no longer fits. Sister Ellery permitted Nurse Sallow to play it in the evenings, after the last dressing change and before lights out, on the theory, never stated outright but understood by everyone in that ward, that a little ordinary music did a shell-shocked man's nerves less harm than an hour of silence broken only by his own thoughts. She played hymns, mostly, and the popular songs of the day, competently rather than brilliantly. The piano of a girl who had taken lessons because every girl of her class took lessons, and had never expected the skill to matter to anyone in particular. The men liked it well enough. It gave the evenings a shape they'd otherwise have lacked. I do not think, in the 2 months I had known her by then, that I had ever once seen music move Rhys Bevan's face by so much as a flicker, and I do not think Nurse Sallow had either, though she never said so, and never stopped playing on the nights he lay nearest the piano, as though the music might, on some particular evening she couldn't predict, finally find its way in. It was his mother's visit, in the 3rd week of October, that changed what Nurse Sallow chose to play. Mrs. Bevan had come the long way from the valleys, a journey of the better part of 2 days by train, with a change at Cardiff and another at London, to sit for one afternoon beside a son who did not turn his head when she entered the room and did not respond when she took his hand. I watched her from my own bed, unable to look away, as she talked to him for 2 hours about nothing in particular. The neighbors, the chapel, a cousin's new baby, whether the allotment had done well that year, in the low, steady voice of a woman who has decided that hope is a discipline rather than a feeling, and refuses to let it lapse simply because the evidence is against her. She did not weep in front of him, though I saw her step into the corridor once and press a handkerchief hard against her mouth before composing herself and coming back in with the same steady voice as before. Near the end of the visit, when words had plainly exhausted themselves and there was little left to report of the valleys, she began, very quietly, to sing. I did not understand the Welsh, but I understood the shape of it, a lullaby, unmistakably, the particular falling cadence every mother in every language uses to settle a child toward sleep. And I saw Nurse Sallow, changing a dressing 3 beds down, go very still and listen with her whole body, the way she listened to everything that might matter to one of her patients. She asked Mrs. Bevan, before the older woman left to catch her train, what the song was called, and wrote the name down carefully in the little notebook she kept in her apron pocket. Lyphonon, the Ash Grove. Mrs. Bevan told her, with the particular ache of a mother recounting a small, ordinary thing that has become unbearably large in retrospect, that she had sung her son that same tune every night of his boyhood, and that his father, before he was lost down the pit 11 years back, had sometimes hummed it at his work, and that Rhys himself, as a small boy, had a habit of humming it under his breath, before sleep, long after he'd outgrown being sung to. She did not play it that night. She spent, I learned afterward, the better part of a week finding someone in the nearby town who could teach her the melody properly. A Welsh curate, as it turned out, serving a small chapel 2 villages over, who was baffled and then quietly moved to be asked by an English volunteer nurse to hum him a lullaby 3 times over so she might carry it home correctly in her ear. She told me much later that she had gone to him twice more that week besides, walking the 4 miles each way on her one free afternoon, because she was determined not to bring Rhys Bevan a version of his own mother's song that was even slightly wrong, and had made the curate write the words out phonetically in her notebook beside the notes, though she never intended to sing them herself, only to know, while she played, what the melody was carrying. She played it on a Thursday evening, nearly 3 weeks after Mrs. Bevan's visit, when the ward had gone quiet and most of us were reading or drifting toward sleep. I noticed only because I happened to be watching her walk to the piano, and because something in the careful way she arranged herself at the bench, the particular deliberateness of a person about to attempt something she has rehearsed alone, many times, but never once in front of anyone who might judge it, told me this evening's playing was not going to be a hymn. The melody came out slow and plain, unaccompanied by anything but the simplest chords beneath it, the kind of arrangement a competent amateur builds for herself, rather than the kind found in any published score. It is a gentle tune, the Ash Grove, rising and falling the way I imagine a hillside itself rises and falls, with a particular ache in its middle phrase that needs no translation to land somewhere true. I watched Nurse Sallow's face as she played, and I understood, watching it, that she was not performing for the ward at all. She had positioned herself without announcing it to anyone, so that the sound would carry most directly to the bed nearest the door, to Rhys Bevan, lying as he always lay, eyes open, seeing, so far as any of us had ever been able to tell, nothing at all. I saw his hand move first. It lay, as it always lay, on top of the blanket, entirely still, and partway through the melody's second phrase, I saw 2 fingers of that hand lift, very slightly, and settle again, in a motion so small I might have imagined it had I not been watching for exactly that kind of thing, with the particular attentiveness 14 bored, broken men develop toward anything even slightly out of the ordinary, in a ward where nothing changes for weeks at a stretch. I sat up straighter without meaning to. 2 beds down, I heard Private Hodges set his book face down on his blanket, very quietly, the way a man sets something down when he does not want the sound of it to break whatever is happening. Nurse Sallow, to her enormous credit, did not stop playing, did not rush to his bedside, did not do any of the things I think a less disciplined person might have done at the sight of the ward's most silent patient, moving a finger for the first time in 4 months. She simply played the melody through again, a shade slower, a shade softer, the way you might repeat a question to someone you suspect has almost, but not quite, heard you the first time. His lips moved on the second pass. No sound came, not at first, only the shape of words forming without breath behind them, the particular motion of a mouth, remembering how mouths are meant to work after months of forgetting. I sat up in my own bed, leg forgotten entirely, and I do not believe I was the only man in that ward holding his breath. Somewhere behind me I heard someone whisper Sister's name, low, as though afraid a louder voice might undo whatever was happening at the far bed. By the third pass through the melody, sound had begun to come with the shapes his lips made, not words yet, just breath given form, a kind of hum, underneath Nurse Sallow's playing that matched, note for note, the melody she was giving him, as though some part of him that the shells and the silence had never quite reached, had simply been waiting, all these months, for the right door to be tried, and had recognized, the instant it was tried, exactly which door it was. Nurse Sallow's hands did not falter on the keys, though I saw, even from my bed, that her eyes had filled. She played the melody a 4th time, and on that pass, Rhys Bevan's humming found actual pitch, wavering and thin, but unmistakably there, tracing the tune's aching middle phrase alongside her, exactly the way a man traces, with one careful finger, the outline of something he has been told he will never see again, but finds, astonishingly, still there beneath his hand. The whole ward had gone entirely still by then, every man among us watching a boy who had not so much as blinked with intention in 4 months make sound of his own free will for the first time since Flanders. Sister Ellery had appeared in the doorway at some point. I do not know when. I had eyes for nothing but the bed by the door, and stood with one hand pressed flat against the frame, the particular stillness of a woman who has learned, through long practice on wards far worse than ours, not to interrupt a miracle mid-sentence. Nurse Sallow let the melody finish, this time, all the way to its last soft falling phrase, and into the silence that followed, the ordinary hospital silence of a ward at evening, broken only by the small sounds of 14 men not quite breathing. Rhys Bevan spoke. "Ma'am," he said, just that, at first, barely above a whisper, his first word in 4 months, offered to an empty room, because the woman it was meant for was 2 days' journey away in the valleys, and did not yet know her son had found his voice again, beside a strange piano, in an English manor house. And then, after a silence, in which I believe every man in that ward finished the job of forgetting how to breathe properly, she used to sing that. She did, Nurse Sallow said, very quietly, not moving from the piano bench, as though sudden movement might frighten the moment back into whatever silence it had come from. She taught it to me herself, so I could bring it to you. You went and learned it, he said, and I heard in his voice, thin and unused as it was, something that had not been in that ward in all the months I'd known him, plain human wonder, at a kindness he had not thought to expect from a stranger. I did, she said. I thought you might like to hear it properly. Rhys Bevan wept, then, the way I imagine a man weeps who has spent 4 months unable to weep at all, in great silent heaves that seemed to cost him something enormous to release. And Sister Ellery crossed the ward at last, and knelt by his bed and let him, murmuring nothing in particular, only steadying him with a hand on his shoulder, the way you steady someone taking their first steps after a long illness. I turned my face to my own pillow. Because some things a man witnesses in a hospital ward are not, I think, quite meant to be watched by 14 other pairs of eyes at once, however much those eyes could not help themselves. And I heard rather than saw the rest of it. The low murmur of Sister Ellery's voice, the ragged catch of Bevan's breathing gradually settling, and beneath it all, very softly, Nurse Sallow beginning the melody once more, quieter still, as though tucking the whole ward in for the night with it. Mrs. Bevan was sent for by telegram that same night, and arrived 2 days later to find a son, who could not yet say a great deal, but who said her name the moment she came through the ward door, which I am told is more than the doctors had promised her she would ever hear again. I was there for that reunion too, unable by then to pretend I was not watching. And I will only tell you that I have seen a great many things in this war I hope never to see again, and that particular afternoon is the one thing I saw in 4 years of it that I hope I never forget. A mother, crossing a hospital ward, at something between a walk and a run, and a son, finally, turning his head to watch her come. Rhys Bevan's recovery from there was slow, and never entirely complete. I do not think the war left any of us entirely as we had been, whatever the discharge papers claimed. But he spoke, after that Thursday evening, more each week, first single words and then short sentences, and then, by December, whole halting conversations with the men in the beds nearest his own. By the time my own leg had healed enough to send me home that winter, he had taken to sitting beside Nurse Sallow at the old out-of-tune piano some evenings, learning, badly and happily, to pick out the melody himself with 2 fingers, while she hummed the words underneath his playing, the way his mother once had underneath hers, and the missing keys in the upper register turned out, by luck, not to matter to a tune that never reached that high. Nurse Sallow went on, I am told, playing quiet evening tunes for whichever silent man in whichever ward seemed to need one, all the rest of that war and some years past it, in hospitals considerably larger and grimmer than Cliff Manor's converted gallery, carrying a small stock of learned melodies, a Scottish air here, an Irish one there, the way another nurse might carry extra bandages, against whichever silence she next found herself standing outside of. I do not know how many other silences she found her way into before she was through. I know only the one I watched myself, from a hospital bed with a bad leg and nothing else to do but pay the closest attention of my life, and I have never since been able to hear that gentle, aching little tune without seeing, again, a boy's 2 fingers lifting off a blanket, reaching, however faintly, back toward the world, and a room full of broken men remembering, all together, what it felt like to hope for something and have it answered.